In the cold silence of space, a great library floated above a dead star. Its walls were made of glowing blue metal, and its shape looked like a spiral shell. No one lived inside the library, but thousands of alien scholars came there every year. They came to study the past of many worlds and many species. It was the largest place of knowledge in the galaxy. Every known race had given parts of their history to be kept safe in the great library. Every record was sorted by date and species. The oldest ones were placed deep in the heart of the archive. The forbidden ones were locked behind shields and codes, and deep among those forgotten shelves a young alien named Vorel moved quietly. Vorel belonged to the Canary, a peaceful race with long arms and soft silver eyes. He had spent 40 years reading the history of lost species and old battles. His people believed in peace, learning, and truth. He had never seen real war or real pain, but something inside him always felt that the stories he read were missing something. Too clean, too calm, too easy. One day, while walking through the oldest sector of the library, he found a door. The door was black metal with red lights blinking slowly above it was a sign written in many languages. In his own, it said restricted access fiction archive. Vorel stopped and stared at the door. He had never seen this section before. He touched the panel beside it. A list of files appeared in the air, glowing with soft white light. He scrolled through them and saw many names of species he had never heard of. Then he saw one word that made his heart beat faster. It was marked with a red tag that said MYTH beside it. Another word appeared, violent. He looked around. No one else was near. He tapped the file. A warning message blinked. Are you sure? He pressed YES. The screen turned dark. Then a voice came through. It was not in his language, but the system translated it for him in real time. It said, "This is not fiction. This is not legend. This is human history." The screen lit up with fire images of burning forests, ancient humans with fire in their eyes fighting beasts with spears and sticks. Vorel blinked. The voice continued, "We were born into a world that tried to kill us. We survived not because we were the strongest, but because we never stopped." The pictures moved fast. Tribes of humans fighting other tribes, blood on stone, cries in the night. Vorel felt cold. He had never seen anything like it. He whispered, "How did they survive this?" Voice replied, "Because they had no other choice." Vorel watched as humans built small villages only for them to be torn down by floods or other humans. He saw children learning to hunt not for sport, but for food. He saw mothers crying over dead sons and still teaching the next child to be strong. He saw leaders rising and falling and rising again. Then came the wars, vast armies of men and women screaming across broken lands, waves of bodies crashing into each other, the dead piled high like mountains. And still they marched forward, still they fought, still they lived. Vorel shook his head. No species should have gone through this. This is too much pain, too much loss. But the voice said, "This is the truth." The images showed metal, swords, fire arrows, catapults burning cities, and through all of it humans changed their skin, their tools, their minds. They learned from pain. They grew through war. They became smarter, faster, colder. Vorel felt something new inside him, fear not of humans, but of what they had endured. He asked softly, "Why is this marked as fiction?" The voice did not answer right away. Instead, it showed a council meeting. Aliens from many species sitting around a great table. One said, "Their story is not possible. No one can survive such a bloody past and still rise." Another said, "If we tell the truth, the galaxy will panic. They are too dangerous, too unstable. We must hide it. Call it fiction." Vorel understood now. The lie was not to protect humans. It was to protect everyone else. The screen showed the end of the first age, humans standing over broken ground, their faces tired but proud. They had lost so much, but they had kept going. The voice spoke again, "You wanted to know who we are. We are the children of fire and blood, and we are not done." Vorel sat down, his hands shaking. Everything he had been taught was wrong. Every lesson, every story had painted humans as wild myths or forgotten failures. But the truth was more powerful than the lie. He stared at the last image, a human woman with scars on her face, holding a spear in one hand and a child in the other. Behind her, the sun was rising over a field of ashes. He looked around the archive, so quiet, so clean, so afraid of the past. He whispered again, "This is not fiction." And the voice replied, "No, this is humanity." For a long time, he sat there. The lights above flickered softly, his mind full of pictures he would never forget. He felt something strange growing inside him. It was not just fear, it was respect, a deep respect for a species that had been broken and still stood tall, a species that had earned its place in the stars not by kindness, But by unbreakable will he stood up and closed the file. He walked away, but he knew he would come back. He had to see more. He had to know how the story ended because now he understood something simple and terrifying. If this history was true, if every war, every death, every victory was real, then humans were not just another species. They were a force, and the galaxy had no idea what they had tried to bury. Vorel looked out the window at the black sea of space. Somewhere out there, the humans were still moving, still building, still surviving, and he knew their story was only beginning. The lights inside the archive grew dim as Vorel walked deeper into the forgotten zone. His fingers touched the cold walls made from metals older than most stars. He followed a single path lit by faint blue lines across the floor. Each step echoed softly through the long hallway. In his mind, the voice of the human archive still whispered fire and blood, fire and blood. That was the truth of human origin. That was their beginning. He reached a circular room. In the center was a single chair made of black stone. He sat, and the room responded. A ring of images appeared around him, each one glowing with heat and movement. He whispered, "Show me the next file." The system responded with a soft hum. A new voice came, different from before. This one was deeper, rougher, like someone who had seen war and never left it behind. The voice said, "Welcome to the age of fire and blood. This is the time when we stopped running from nature and began to fight it. This is when we learned to bend the world to our well, this is when we started to become what others would fear." The images changed now. They showed vast forests thick with danger. Humans moved through the trees with sharp eyes and sharper tools. Their clothes were made of animal skin. Their weapons were stone tied with fiber. Every day was a fight to eat, to drink, to live. Vorel watched as one group of humans lit fire in a cave. The flames danced against the rock. The tribe cheered for them. Fire was not just heat, it was power. It kept the beasts away. It cooked meat. It gave light in the dark. The voice said, "Fire was our first weapon and our first friend. With it we survived what stronger creatures could not. With it we changed the balance of life." Vorel nodded slowly. He understood that part. Many species discovered fire, but humans used it for more. They worshipped it. They feared it. They fed it. The screen showed a small village near a wide river. People gathered around a fire pit. A storm came. The river rose. Water crushed the village. Half the people were lost, the rest rebuilt. Next came a raid. Another human group attacked the village. They fought with sticks and stones and bare hands. It was violent, fast, brutal. When it ended, only a few were left standing. They did not cry. They took what they could and moved to higher ground. Vorel blinked slowly. So much death, so little time to grieve. The voice said, "We learned to live in pain. It was not weakness to feel, but weakness to stop moving. So we kept moving." The screen changed again. Now it showed humans building with logs and mud. Farms started to grow. Cattle were kept behind fences. Children played with simple toys. It looked almost peaceful until the sky turned black. Smoke filled the air. Another group came, this time with fire arrows. They burned everything, the farms, the homes, the people. Vorel's hands gripped the chair. How did they live like this? How did they wake each day not knowing if they would see the next? The voice said, "We did not expect peace, so when peace came, we prepared for it." To end, the images now moved faster. Villages became towns. Towns became cities. Stone buildings rose. Walls were built. Weapons became sharper, stronger, deadlier. And always there was one truth: if you were not strong, you would not survive. Vorel saw a great city with towers and statues. He saw armies marching with armor and spears. He saw leaders standing over maps planning battles. He saw kings and queens making choices that would cost thousands of lives. The voice said, "We became more than survivors, we became rulers. And when we ruled, we fought each other for more land, more food, more control, and sometimes just more blood." The screen showed a great war. Thousands of soldiers charging across open land. The sky filled with arrows. The ground turned red. Screams rose like thunder. Vorel felt sick, but he could not stop watching. The voice said this was the age where stories became legend, where names were written in stone and memory, not because they were kind, but because they were strong enough to change the world. Vorel saw a man standing in a field alone. All around him were bodies. He held a sword and looked at the sky. The voice said he lost everyone he loved, but he kept fighting because he believed his people could live a better life. The scene shifted again. Now humans built great ships and crossed oceans. They found new lands. Sometimes they traded, sometimes they conquered. The voice said, "We did not always choose peace, but we always chose movement." We believed that standing still was the first step toward death. Vorel saw cities fall, empires burn, And yet from the ashes new cities rose, new empires grew, each one stronger, smarter, more prepared. He saw schools, temples, libraries, humans wrote their stories in books and walls. They painted the faces of their heroes and their gods. They sang songs of victory. They also sang songs of sorrow. The voice said, "We remembered the dead, even when we did not agree with their cause, because every loss shaped us, every pain taught us something new." Vorel understood now humans were not monsters, they were not demons, they were fire walking in the shape of flesh. They burned through history not because they wanted to, but because the world around them gave them no other choice. He asked quietly, "Did they ever stop fighting?" The voice replied, "Not in this age. This was the age where fighting was the only way to grow." Vorel watched. As time passed, clothing changed, weapons changed, language changed, but the heart remained the same. A human standing before a burning village, a mother holding her child after a battle, a leader riding into the storm to protect his people. These images stayed in his mind. The voice said, "In this age, we were tested every day, and though we fell again and again, we always rose, because falling was not the end, it was part of the path." Vorel leaned back in the chair. The images faded, but the fire stayed in his eyes. He whispered, "They are not like us," and the voice answered softly, "No, they are not like anyone." He stood and walked toward the exit. The hallway felt different now. He felt different. He carried the weight of their past, and it was heavy, but it was also something else. It was real, more real than any story he had ever read. He paused at the end of the hallway and looked back. Once the blue lights pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. He knew this was only the beginning. The age of fire and blood was the first chapter, and if humans had made it through that, then whatever came next would not be softer. It would be louder, brighter, and even more unforgettable. He walked on into the next chamber. The archive was not done, and neither was he. Vorel stood at the edge of the next chamber. The lights were darker here, with red pulses moving like blood through veins in the walls. The air felt heavy, as if it remembered too much. He stepped forward, and the floor lit up under his feet. The voice returned, this time slower, colder, filled with something hard to explain. It said, "Welcome to the age of machines. This is when our war changed shape. This is when fire and blood became steel and smoke." The room filled with sound, roaring engines clashing, metal screaming wind. The images lit the walls. Great black factories rose from the earth. Chimneys belched smoke into gray skies. Men and women worked with fire in their hands and oil on their skin. They did not build homes or art. They built machines. Big machines, fast machines, machines made for war. Vorel saw the first guns, loud and crude, but deadly. He saw ships made of steel that cut through water like blades. He saw trains pulling weapons across continents. And still he asked, why did they keep fighting? The voice answered, because the world kept testing them, because peace never lasted, because their nature was to prepare for the storm, not enjoy the calm. The screen showed a battlefield, dark mud, heavy boots, gas in the air. Men ran through wire, and smoke explosions shook the ground. Nothing was clear, only noise, only fear, only death. Vorel had seen war before in old records of other species, but this was different. This was endless. This was personal. He watched soldiers scream for mothers. He saw hands trembling as they held cold weapons. He saw bravery and horror walk side by side. The voice said this was the first global war. The world tore itself apart and called it duty. Nations turned young boys into soldiers, dreams into orders, hope into ash. Vorel looked down. He could not speak. He could only listen. The war ended, but the machines stayed. They were improved, sharpened, perfected. The second war came faster than the first. This time, it was louder, deadlier. The screen showed planes dropping fire from the sky, tanks crushing cities, nations falling like trees in a storm. And then the world changed forever. The image froze. A single bomb dropped, a white light, then silence. The screen faded. When it returned, a city was gone, nothing left but shadows burned into stone. Vorel gasped. He had never seen such a thing. Even the most violent species he had studied never reached this level. The voice spoke quietly. This was the weapon that ended millions in a breath, born from fear, built by minds that wanted to stop war, but instead they made it worse. Vorel saw leaders meeting in dark rooms talking about peace, while holding the power to end worlds in their hands. The machines of war were now machines of control. The threat became the weapon. The silence between battles became more dangerous than the battles themselves. And still humans pushed forward. They did not stop building. They went to the stars. The screen showed rockets launching, flames rising under steel giants, people cheering not for war, but for escape. The voice said, we reached beyond Earth not because we were curious, but because we were afraid. We knew we had broken our world, So we looked for another. Vorel saw the first human space station's metal homes floating. In black, their faces looked tired, their eyes looked older than their age. They were not just travelers, they were survivors. The machines changed again, no longer just for killing now, for building in space, for protecting from cold and silence and radiation. But even in the stars, the fear came with them. Weapons were hidden in peaceful ships, codes were written to shut down life systems. Every tool had two uses, one for peace, one for war. The voice said we could not escape our past we carried it like blood in our veins. Even as we reached the stars, we remembered the ground, the mud, the fire. Vorel watched a conflict. In orbit, two ships from rival nations fighting over a mining rock. Lasers cut through steel bodies floated into the void. Flags burned in zero gravity, and still the machines evolved. Artificial minds, self-learning systems, drones without souls, ships without captains. He saw a battlefield controlled by machines, no humans present, just cold math and fast death. But somewhere behind the machines, there was always a human hand, always a choice made by someone with a beating heart. The voice said our greatest power came not from machines, but from our will to use them. No matter how advanced they became, they always followed our fear, our hope, our rage. Vorel stepped back from the images, his breath shaking. He asked quietly, did they ever stop? The voice answered, we slowed, we changed, but war never left us. It simply changed name and face. The images now showed peace talks. Leaders shaking hands, treaties signed, smiles made for the cameras, but behind them walls were built, secrets kept, weapons hidden. The voice said we learned to wear peace like clothing, but we never forgot what was under the skin. Vorel turned to leave the room, but the screen stopped him. One last image appeared. A child sitting on the floor playing with a toy tank. Behind him, a wall screen showing a real battle far away. The voice said we taught our children about peace, but we showed them war. The image faded, the room went quiet. Vorel walked slowly back into the main corridor, his mind full, his heart heavy. The machines of war had not surprised him, but the acceptance of them had. Humans did not worship war, they hated it, feared it, but used it when needed, and sometimes even when it was not. He looked out through a glass wall at the stars, so calm, so far, and yet he could now feel the tension behind their light. Somewhere out there, humans were still watching, still building, still surviving. Vorel knew the next file would show even more. The age of machines was not the end, it was only the turning point, and the truth of what came after he was not sure he was ready to see, but he would look anyway, because now he had to know not just how they fought, but how they endured and what kind of future they were shaping, not with hope, but with memory, with warning, and with fire. The hallway to the next chamber was narrow and quiet. The walls were smooth and dark, and the floor lit up softly under Vorel's steps. There was no sound, no hum, no echo. It felt like the galaxy was holding its breath. He paused at the entrance and looked up at the sign glowing in a pale white light. The turning point. He stepped inside, and the door closed behind him. This chamber was different. There were no loud images, no flashing lights, no fire, no smoke, only one wide screen and a single chair. He sat and waited. The voice returned. It was not angry, not loud, not cold. It sounded tired, old. It said, you have seen our fire, you have seen our machines. Now you will see the moment. We looked at the stars not with hunger, but with fear. The screen came alive. A planet covered in gray clouds floated in space. It looked like Earth, but it was not. Vorel leaned closer. This was one of the first human colonies. It was not a paradise. It was hard, dry, sharp, but humans had made it home. They built domes and farms and water tunnels. They built homes from dust. They built hope from nothing. The voice said we left Earth because we had to. Our world was broken. Our people were tired, but we carried everything with us, our history, our pain, our memories, and our hunger. Vorel saw human children running through a metal school. He saw adults fixing wind machines and growing food in dry soil. He saw laughter, real laughter. He saw peace, but peace never stayed long in human stories. The screen showed a message sent from Earth to the colony. It was simple. Another war had started, not between nations, but between worlds. The colonies had grown strong. They wanted freedom. Earth wanted control. The voice said we had changed the battlefield, but not the reason. Vorel watched ships flying through space. Some carried food, some carried bombs, some never returned. This was the first war between stars, the first time humans looked at space and saw not wonder, but strategy. Vorel saw soldiers trained in zero gravity. He saw stations armed with silent weapons. He saw machines drifting through the black with no light, no heat, no signal waiting. The voice said we learned to fight without sound, without fire, without warning. We learned that space did not forgive mistakes. And still we fought, Voral asked. Why did they not stop? Why not return to Earth? The voice answered. Because we had tasted freedom, and no one gives that back. The screen showed a colony, falling its dome, cracked, its farms burned, but not all were lost. Some humans escaped. They fled to deeper space, to new stars, and something changed. The humans began to look outward, not as soldiers, but as seekers. The voice said, we reached the edge of known space, and we found something unexpected. Voral saw the moment. Of first contact, a human ship approached a glowing alien station. The aliens were tall, thin, covered in blue skin and bright robes. They greeted the humans with signs of peace, and the humans responded the same. Voral smiled. For a moment, there was no war, no fear, no fire. The voice said, we learned that we were not alone, and for a time, that gave us hope. More species followed, trade began, stories were shared, cultures mixed, but stories of Earth spread fast, and fear spread faster. The screen showed a council of alien leaders. They spoke of humans as unstable, as dangerous, as cursed. Some wanted peace, others wanted a wall, a line drawn to keep humans out. The voice said, we were not trusted, not because of what we did, but because of what we survived. Voral saw old battles shown as warnings. He saw alien children taught that humans came from war, that humans were made by pain, that humans could not be allowed to lead. The humans saw this too, and they stayed quiet. They smiled, they traded, they built, but they remembered. The voice said, we turned our focus inward. We began to build not weapons, but strength, not power, but unity. Voral watched as humans created the Union, a new group, not tied to Earth or old colonies, a new dream, a new path. They built cities in orbit. They made peace between old enemies. They planted gardens on dead moons, and they watched the stars, because the turning point was not peace, it was patience. The screen showed a disaster. A dying star exploded near a peaceful system. Radiation spread. One alien world was dying. Ships from other species turned away. Too dangerous, too far, too costly. But human ships arrived. They landed in the fire. They pulled the people from burning cities. They gave their food, their ships, their lives. Voral watched as a human woman carried an alien child through falling ash. She smiled. Though her suit was broken, she fell before help could reach her. The voice said, that was the moment they began to believe us, not all, but enough. The humans had shown what they were not, with speeches, but with sacrifice, and the galaxy could not forget it. Voral sat back in silence. He understood now. The turning point was not a single battle. It was not a treaty. It was not a leader. It was a choice. The choice to stop proving strength through war and start proving it through will, through action, through time. The screen faded. The room was quiet again. Voral whispered, they changed. The voice replied, no, they remembered who they wanted to be. Voral stood and walked to the doorway. The lights behind him dimmed. The archive had shown him the age of war, the age of machines, the rise to stars. But this was the point where humans became something more. They were no longer just survivors. They were symbols of pain, of fire, of blood, yes, but also of something deeper, of choice, of growth, of meaning. He walked into the next hallway with steady steps. There were more files ahead, more truths, more shadows. But now he was ready, not because he understood everything, but because he finally understood this. The galaxy feared humans not because of their past, but because of what they might become. And Voral knew that part of the story was still being written somewhere out there in the quiet stars. The future was waiting, and it had a human face. Voral entered the next chamber with heavy thoughts in his mind. The door behind him sealed with a soft hiss, and the room filled with a low hum, like a whisper traveling through stone. This place was colder than the last, and darker too. A single screen stood at the center, surrounded by tall shelves filled with sealed cases, each one marked with red signs and warning lights. Voral stepped toward the screen. He no longer hesitated when the system asked for access. He pressed yes, and the screen came to life. The voice returned, but now it spoke slower, like it was carrying something it did not want to reveal. You have seen our past, the voice said. You have seen our pain and our rise and our struggle. Now you must see the part they tried to hide. Voral raised his head. Who hid it? He asked. The voice answered, those who feared us, those who decided the truth was too dangerous, not for us, but for them. The screen showed a great council chamber floating above a bright gas giant. Inside sat leaders from 100 worlds. Their faces showed worry and silence as they watched human history play before them. Fire, war, sacrifice, survival. One voice spoke, they cannot be real. Another replied, if they are real, we must keep them away. The council voted in secret. They wrote a report. They marked human history as fiction. They called it exaggerated. They said no species could survive so much and still stand tall. They erased files, changed records, rewrote events, and they ordered that any mention of true human history must be locked away. Vorel clenched his fists. He had believed in knowledge and truth in the library, but now he saw that even knowledge could be bent, even truth could be buried. The voice continued, "We were not told, we were not warned, we were labeled as myth while our people gave aid and peace and hope." The screen showed human diplomats smiling in rooms where no one trusted them. They were watched, followed, tested. Vorel saw one meeting. A human commander was asked to explain how humanity survived its early years. He told the truth, the wars, the hunger, the endless loss. The room went silent. Then the alien leaders laughed. They said it was a story too dramatic, too wild, too dark, but Vorel knew now it was real, and the laughter came from fear. The screen changed again. Now it showed a small team of alien scholars deep in the archive. They had found part of the truth. They wanted to publish it, to share it. They were silent, sent away their work, removed. The voice said the great lie was not just in words, it was in action, in silence and fear. But not everyone agreed. Vorel watched as a secret group began to gather. Aliens, humans, scholars, pilots, teachers. They believed the truth must be known. They believed the galaxy had a right to understand what made humans what they were. They called themselves the Keepers. The voice said, "I was born from them. I was built to tell the story when someone was ready to hear it." "You are that someone?" Vorel stepped back, his mind full of fire and questions. "Why would they do this?" he asked again. The voice replied, "Because they thought the truth would lead to war. They thought if the galaxy saw what humans survived, it would fear what they could do." But Vorel shook his head. They feared the wrong thing. They should not fear the strength. They should fear the silence, the forgetting, the lie. The screen dimmed and showed the last image. A human child sitting in a classroom on a far colony. She raised her hand and asked her teacher, "Is it true that our people came from fire?" The teacher paused, then smiled and said, "That is only an old story." Vorel felt something sharp in his chest, a lie told to protect others, a lie that burned the ones who lived it. He looked around the room at the sealed cases, at the warnings. Knew now that many had worked to keep this hidden, but more would work to bring it into the light. The voice said, "The truth is not a weapon, it is a mirror." Vorel touched the screen and whispered, "Then let them see." The system blinked, then began to unlock more files, files that had not been opened in centuries, images, videos, journals, memories, all waiting. Vorel turned to leave. He would not keep this truth to himself. He would carry it beyond the archive, to the people, to the galaxy, because history was not meant to sleep, it was meant to speak. And it was time for the truth to speak louder than the lie. The door opened, light poured in. Vorel stepped forward, his shadow behind him, his purpose ahead. He would be the first voice in a long time to say it out loud. The humans survived because they chose to. The humans suffered because they had to. The humans remembered because forgetting would mean it was all for nothing. And now the galaxy would remember too. The stars outside the archive burned soft and slow, like old eyes watching from far away. Vorel stood at the edge of the highest observation deck, alone with his thoughts, and the truth still fresh in his mind. He had not spoken since the files unlocked, since the voice showed him the lie, since the great silence inside the galaxy was broken by memory. He looked down at his hands, not to see them, but to feel something real, something still his. Below the deck, the archive systems pulsed with quiet life. The truth was moving now. It was not hidden anymore. A signal blinked on the far console, an incoming ship. No weapons active, no flags shown its path. Was slow, careful, deliberate. Vorel watched the data scroll across the screen. It was human, he felt. His breath paused for just a moment. He had never met a human. He had only seen them in the stories, in the footage, in the shadows of the past. Now, they were coming now. They were here. The voice returned not from the archive, but from the ship itself. A calm greeting spoken in perfect standard, requesting permission to dock, requesting peace. Vorel answered with a single word, "Granted." The ship moved like it had all the time in the galaxy, not fast, not slow, but steady. It docked with precision and silence. The doors opened. One figure stepped out, tall, still clothed in a simple gray suit, with no mark of rank or nation, no armor, no escort, only a bag in one hand and quiet eyes. The human looked around the corridor like someone walking through a memory. Then they saw Vorel and stopped for a long moment. Neither moved. Then the human spoke. "You must be the one who opened the archive." Vorel nodded, his voice caught between fear and wonder. "Yes." "And you?" The human smiled, "Just a little. I am only here to see if the truth still matters." They walked together through the halls. The human asked nothing. Vorel said little. They passed the doors Vorel had entered days ago. They stood before the screen that had shown the blood and the fire and the silence. That followed. The human placed the bag on the floor and opened it. Inside were old things, books, pictures, a child's drawing of Earth with too many stars, and a single metal tag with a name worn smooth. These are all we had left. The human said things we carried when no one believed. We came from pain, things we held when they told us to smile and forget. Vorel asked quietly, why bring them here? Because this is the place where forgetting ends. The human touched the screen. It came alive again, but this time it showed something new, not war, not fire, but hands reaching, helping, holding. These are the stories they never asked for. The human said stories of how we fed strangers when we had no food, stories of how we sang to the dying, stories of how we buried our enemies so they would not be forgotten. Vorel watched with wide eyes. He had seen the fire, now he saw the warmth. The human continued, we did not come to show our power, we came to show our memory. We remember everything, the pain, the loss, the rage, but also the light, the moments that held us together when the world tried to tear us apart. They walked deeper into the archive, past the machines, past the locked files, past the silence. They reached the final chamber Vorel had never entered it before. The door opened without a sound. Inside was a circle of light and nothing else. This is where the final record goes. The human said the last word in the archive. Vorel asked, what will it say? The human stepped into the circle and spoke slowly. It will say we were real. It will say we were broken and still walked. It will say we were feared and still offered peace. It will say we were called fiction, but we lived, we lived. They placed the metal tag in the center. It caught the light and held it like it did not want to let go. Vorel looked at the human and saw something strange, not anger, not pride, but peace. A peace earned, not given. You carry all this and still smile, Vorel said. The human smiled again, softer this time, because the fire did not destroy us, it shaped us. Because the pain did not stop us, it taught us. Because the lie did not erase us, it revealed us. They walked back to the dock together. The human looked at the stars once more. We will return again, not as warriors, not as myths, but as neighbors, if you let us. Vorel did not speak right away. He felt the weight of the galaxy pressing against his chest, the fear, the silence, the long lie, but he also felt the truth, and it was stronger. He nodded once. We will listen. The human stepped into the ship. The doors closed, the engines hummed. The ship left without hurry, without noise, just a presence passing through the stars. Vorel remained on the deck long after the ship was gone. He did not return to the files. He did not need to. He had seen enough. The galaxy would change now, not because humans forced it, but because the truth always rises, even from ash, even from silence, even from lies, especially from lies. And Vorel knew this was only the beginning. The return was not a threat, it was a reminder that stories do not end when the last war is fought. They end when the last truth is spoken, and the humans had spoken. They had returned, not to be feared, but to be remembered. The galaxy spun slow and bright around the archive, now no longer silent, no longer hidden, no longer afraid of its own truth. Vorel stood in the center of the great hall, the same place where he had first seen fire and blood and sacrifice etched into the past of a race called human. His hands were steady now, but his heart carried weight heavier than gravity itself. The chambers behind him were no longer closed. The files once sealed had been opened. The voices once erased had been spoken, and the lie once told to protect the many had cracked like old stone. In his hand was a crystal, thin and pale, filled with memory. It contained the final record, not written by the humans, not spoken by the archive, not crafted by any council. It was his own, a record from the one who saw the story from start to now, a record of the truth as it had been and as it should remain. He placed the crystal into the final socket. The archive lit up in a warm light, not cold, not sharp, but gentle like dawn over distant water. Then the voice returned, no longer a voice of war or pain or fear. Now it spoke like a guide, not a ghost. It said, you have seen our beginning, you have seen what we endured, but to understand our place, you must now see what we left behind. The walls shimmered, and the screen unfolded into a sea of images, not of war, not of fire, but of silence, of children staring into empty skies, of mothers burying memories they could not explain, of fathers who taught peace but dreamed of fire. This was the legacy left in the bones of Earth. This was the pain passed down, not through scars, but through stories. The voice said, we tried to move forward, but we carried our ghosts with us, not to forget, but to remember. Vorel saw a boy staring at an old flag with colors faded by time. He did not understand it, But he felt something in his chest, something older than him, something stronger than anything he had ever learned. The screen shifted to a classroom. A girl stood and asked her teacher why. Are we always called strong? The teacher paused, then answered softly. Because we remember pain, even when we smile. The archive now showed the homes built in new colonies, strong walls, clean air, open fields, but inside the rooms were pictures of cities. Long gone, books filled with stories of those who never returned, music written by those who had watched the sky fall and still stood. The voice said, our legacy is not war, it is memory. It is the refusal to forget. It is the power to rise and still. Voral watched a group of humans plant trees on a moon where nothing had ever grown. One of them placed a small stone under the roots, a name carved into it, a name of someone who never left Earth. We carry our past, the voice said, not as chains, but as seeds. Voral stepped back. He understood now that the most human thing was not survival. It was planting hope in the soil of suffering. The galaxy feared human pain because it had never faced its own. It had built walls around the past and called it peace, but humans had walked through fire and kept walking, not stronger, not better, just more honest. He looked to the stars and saw ships move without banners. He saw humans trading, helping, building, and teaching, not trying to lead, not trying to rule, just being present. Their presence alone was a reminder of what the galaxy wished it could forget. That peace was not born from silence. It was carved from the noise of history. Voral asked the voice, what do you want us to do with this truth? The voice replied, tell it, not with fear, not with warning, but with care, because the greatest danger was never that we were violent. The greatest danger was that you would erase the lessons we died to learn. He turned away from the screen outside the window. The stars continued their slow dance. He saw a single human ship drifting through the black like a story that refused to end. He knew they would not stay in one place. It was not their way, but everywhere they went, they carried the memory, and everywhere they touched would remember them, not for what they took, but for what they left behind. Voral walked to the chamber's edge. The other scholars waited, alien faces, curious and cautious. They had questions, he had answers. Not all would believe, not all would accept, but the truth had already awakened, and it would not sleep again. He stood before them and spoke, not as a canary, not as a scholar, but as a witness. He told them about the fire. He told them about the machines. He told them about the silence and the lie. He told them about the return. He told them about the child who remembered a name they had never heard. He told them about the woman who gave her life to save someone from a world she did not know. He told them everything, and when he finished, the room was silent, not from fear but from respect. The truth had weight, and now they carried it too. Later that night, Voral returned to his quarters. He sat at his desk and wrote a final note. He did not use large words. He did not use ancient language. He wrote it simply. Humans were not a story of war. They were a story of becoming, of learning, of holding on. Their legacy is not power. It is pain remembered with purpose. He sealed the message and sent it through the archive network. It would travel far, to scholars, to leaders, to strangers. Some would ignore it, some would question it, but some would understand, and that would be enough. The stars outside blinked like tired eyes watching over old wounds. Somewhere across the stars, a human child looked up and whispered a name they never knew, and in that moment the past lived again, not in blood, not in fire, but in memory. The story was finished, but the legacy had just begun.